grab a drink, get comfy, and prepare to learn about
the strange, the unusual, and the downright stupid things you didn't think that you needed to know about.
I'm Kaila.
And I'm Brooke. And this is Drunk in the Library.
Hello. We're back and we're spooky.
Like always.
No, but really, we're spookier.
Because it's October and it's fucking Spooktober.
Spook time. Spook time.
Spooktacular. So fucking excited.
Ugh.
And we're telling you spooky tales. Well, not really, but like kind of.
No, we're going to ease you into the spooky tales a little bit, just in case, like, you're not into the spooks.
Yeah.
So we've got a couple of really, really hot topics planned for October. This one is our first one. Start you off light spook. We're going to talk about funeral rites today.
And rituals and things... things of the such.
Before we delve into that, if you like the content we produce, you think Brooke and I are even, like, moderately funny, please like, comment, subscribe, give us a review or rating wherever you listen to us. Did you like how I combined those two for revating?
Yeah.
Give us a revate.
Please and thank you. It means so much to us so that we can continue doing things like this, because we want to continue doing things like this. So please do all the things, and yeah. We do have a question, comment, concern from last week in regards to where do Flemish people hail from.
Yes, it's a surprising answer.
It is a really surprising answer. It's Belgium?
Hey, man. What do we know?
That's that, yeah. Don't know why, but okay, yeah, Belgium. So the way that we're going to do this is, with this one, we've both prepared two topics. Kayla's going to start us off with her first one. I'll do mine. We'll take a short break, and then we'll alternate again, and go from there. So, what do you got?
All right, so my first one is called Famadi Hana.
Okay.
It is also called the turning of the bones.
Okay.
And it's a funeral custom still used today in Madagascar.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to have, like, fairly recent origins, dating back to, like, the 17th century in its most modern format. So basically what happens during Famadi Hana is people bring the bodies of their ancestors out of the crypts that they are usually kept in. Oh, actually, before we, like, get too deep into this, I do want to preface that, like, although we may laugh and joke, neither of us are poking fun at any customs that we talk about today. I think that's important to note, just especially with this one, because it is still practiced. Mm-hmm. Even if we laugh and joke, we are not making fun of or joking about these customs.
I also would like to make a note, too, that some of these things can be a little gory.
Yes.
And they are not for the faint of heart. So keep that in mind if you get easily, like, nauseated or squeamish, because there are some things that are just, like, a lot to process. So just keep that in mind.
Yes.
Content warning.
So, back to Famadi Hana.
Okay.
So basically people bring the bodies of their ancestors out of the crypts that they're usually kept in. Mm-hmm. The bodies then get, like, rewrapped in nice, new, fresh cloth. And they write the names on the cloth so that way that the ancestors are always remembered, which I think is really interesting. Okay. Then the people dance to live music while carrying the bodies over their heads.
Okay.
Whoop, whoop. The family dances around the tomb and then returns the bodies at nightfall. The tombs are, like, a very important part of this, and the people of Madagascar spend a lot of money on them because it's, like, a representation of who they are.
Okay.
So, like, your house might be, like, you know, kind of bland and fairly normal, but,
I know, I'm, like, looking
trees.
at that, too, and I'm like, what is that light?
There's, like, shadows reflecting on our curtains that separate us, but it's definitely just trees outside.
Okay. Weird.
Anyway, they use the tombs to, like, represent who they were in life.
Okay.
So the Marina tribe specifically, their tombs are built partially underground and contain a chamber where the bodies of their ancestors are kept on shelves. And they are, like, wrapped in silk shrouds.
Okay.
Bodies are buried or placed face down to symbolize the cycle of life and death.
Okay.
And they're sometimes buried with things like money or alcohol as offerings, which I can really get behind, because if you're going to leave me anything, let it be money or alcohol.
Alcohol for sure.
Yeah. The ritual ends at nightfall because the Malagasy people, which, side note, that's a weird, like, way to term the people from Madagascar, Malagasy. But they see the sun as their source of power and do not want to welcome the negative energy that the night brings, so the ceremony has to end at nightfall.
Oh.
The first time Farihana is celebrated, Famadihana is celebrated, the body must exit the tomb feet first, but return head first because it has now entered the, the cycle from just the body to an ancestor.
Okay.
So, like, the Famadihana tradition is what makes it an ancestor.
I was going to say, is that what, like, is this like a, like, ancestral, transition?
So, basically, yeah.
Okay.
So, the custom comes from the belief that the ancestor spirit can only join the dead once the body has been fully decomposed.
Okay.
And the ceremonies have been done. Sometimes this can take years, so, like, they're often bringing out several generations of people for these.
So when does this take place every couple years? Do they have certain years that they do this, or does it, like...
I'll go into that a little bit more. So, they believe that the dead act as, like, go-betweens between, like, the period in this period that they're, like, go-betweens between the truly dead and the living.
Okay.
So the ritual is usually celebrated anywhere between every 5 and 7 years.
Okay.
Family can travel far away from it, making it, like, an important part of the familial bond. How you decide when is the right time to begin the tradition, you ask? Why? When your loved one appears to you in a dream, of course.
Oh, God.
So, usually the ancestor will appear in, like, a senior family member's dream. Then they seek out an astrologer, who determines when the best time for the ceremony to begin is.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, it's like it doesn't always necessarily happen, like, immediately after death, I guess. And then, like, after that, it wasn't really clear on how you determine how often it's done. I don't know if it's, like, does somebody else have to dream of them? I don't know if it's, like, okay, now we know that grandma is Famadihana and we're going to do it every 5 years. Like, it wasn't super specific on that.
Okay.
Famadihana is on the decline in recent years because the silk shrouds that are customary to it are, like, super expensive.
Yeah.
And interestingly, the Catholic Church does not frown on this. Like, so there's, like, this big thing about, like, missionaries don't want you to do it because it's obviously not, like, super Christian.
Okay.
But the Catholic Church doesn't frown upon it because it views the custom as cultural versus religious. So, like, the Catholic Church is fine with it. The missionaries don't want you doing it.
Okay.
There are a lot of people, too, who do it who are, like, this weird, like, mix of the traditional Madagascar culture and Christian that still celebrate it.
Okay.
The people see it as, like, an important way to respect the dead and for the family to come together. Like I said, there's, like, a lot of, I guess the people who live farther away don't get to travel to see their other relatives very often. So this is super important to, like, keep that family bond together. Unfortunately, the tradition has been linked to the spread of the pneumonic plague.
You mean the bubonic plague?
No, the pneumonic.
What's that?
It's, like, one step further than bubonic.
What?
So from what I was reading, like, it's the bubonic plague when it first sets in, and then it gets to your lungs, and it becomes the pneumonic plague.
Oh.
Yeah. So the Malagasy government outlawed the ritual for people who have died of plague because of the contamination factor, but, like, some people still ignore that. And in 2017, there were 1,200 cases of the plague reported in Madagascar.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's fucking crazy.
Yeah.
So is, like, cremation frowned upon then? Like, do they, like, want everybody then to have like a burial like that so that they can do that?
I didn't look specifically to see if like this is, I think this is what it seems like this is what most of the like traditional culture does.
Okay.
So I don't think it's necessarily frowned upon because again it's not like a religious ceremony.
Yeah.
It's just more cultural. But I would assume so, yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
Never heard of that.
I know.
It's fucking cool.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty. So then I have for you Tibetan sky burials, which they're a lot. So I will preface this one by saying that this is a bit rough.
Okay.
I understand it, but it's a lot.
Okay.
So they're also called celestial burials. My sources are Wikipedia, HowStuffWorks.com, and Atlas Obscura. So the practice of sky burials is actually like pretty ancient. One of the first records is found of them date back to a 12th century Buddhist treaty. As the name suggests, they're primarily a Tibetan custom, but they were practiced by the Chinese and the Mongolians as well, and evidence of them has been found at sites such as Stonehenge and Göbekli Tepe, which is like an archaeological site in Turkey. Mm-hmm. So, like, what exactly is it? So first, the body is kept in a sitting position for 24 to 48 hours and is prayed over by a lama, which is the Buddhist teacher.
Okay.
Family members offer prayers, leave gifts for the deceased. The body is then cleaned and blessed, and then the spine is broken. They're essentially like they break the spine so that they're easier to like maneuver. Yeah. Okay. So they kind of fold them up into like this like neat white cloth. And a close family member or friend will then be tasked with carrying the body up to the actual like burial site. And I'm going to use the term burial, but it's not an actual burial.
Okay.
It's just like
resting site.
Yeah, I guess so. Like it's just like a broader term for what this actually is going to be. So the ritual has to like start at dawn. It does take like a few days for all like the pre-stuff to kind of be done. And it's situated away from populated residential areas. So the next part can get a little bit gruesome. So after saying their final goodbyes, a Regapa, or a body breaker will come take the body, place it face down on like a bed of stones. Juniper is burned to attract vultures. And the Rogyapa will start by removing the deceased hair and like basically start to deconstruct the body into smaller parts. So usually the family's not present. Like they are, but they're not in an area where they can see what's actually being done. Like there's an understanding as to what happens during this, but like a lot of families choose not to actually witness the breaking of the body. It's encouraged in like Buddhist beliefs though, because it's a way of basically overcoming like the stigma of death and coming to terms with it. Like it's almost like as if you watch it and like you've really taken in the fact that like your loved one is not there anymore. Yeah. That's okay. You need to come to terms with it. It's just a shell,
yeah.
So chunks of flesh are then thrown to the vultures until all that remains are bones. The bones are then crushed and mixed with barley flour, tea, and yak butter and are given to, like, other scavengers in the area. So, like, usually the vultures are there first and, like, know this is going on because these sites are used over and over and over again. So they're pretty aware of, like, how this, like, what's going to happen.
Yeah.
There are other creatures that kind of come into play, like other birds, wolves tend to stalk the area. So those are the ones that are going to, like, usually take over with the bones. In poorer communities who can't really afford the whole ritual like itself, usually the body is just brought up, laid atop the stones, and left for the birds to pick at. There's no like waiting a few days or like blessing it or like, you know, dismembering it. They kind of just leave it for nature to take care of.
Okay.
So there's a couple reasons why this exists. So in Buddhism, the body is just like a vessel for the soul or the spirit before it moves on to the next life and starts anew in a different body or form. So when you die, your spirit leaves your body and the body is like nothing but like a shell. So it's kind of considered like your last like act of gratitude because your body's being used now to like sustain other living creatures.
Sure.
So it's kind of like the circle of life.
I can get behind that.
Yeah. More realistic things that are involved in it is that the ground in Tibet is like super hard and impermeable. So traditional burial is pretty difficult to do. Also, Tibet is situated above the tree line, so there's not a lot of trees that they have access to. So starting a fire and then performing cremation isn't really feasible. There are a lot of laws in place regarding these burials. For one, it's considered disrespectful to witness one for like tourism purposes. There are burial sites that have tours and you can pay to go on one and see this occur, but it's pretty discouraged and family members there are probably gonna
look at you weird.
Be pretty pissed off about it. I mean, I get it. Like, if someone just shows up to, like, your family member's funeral...
And they're taking photos?
And you're like, who the fuck are you?
Right.
There are a couple places that did get permission to film them.
Okay.
So, like, you probably could find, like, videos and stuff online in regards to it.
See, I'd be interested to, like, go and see the sites, not necessarily witness one of these happening out of respect, but then, like, you know, like, visit a museum or something based on it.
Yeah.
Where it kind of, like, breaks it down
I think, like, the BBC was allowed to film one.
Okay.
I mean, like, I think they weren't obviously allowed to show, like, the body.
Yeah.
But, like, you can get the general feel of it. So, also, like, the vultures that are involved are, like, seen as sacred and are sometimes even called, like, holy eagles. Some believe that they represent, like, a female sky spirit. With that being said, it's prohibited to disturb the vultures while the practice is taking place. Over the years, their populations have dwindled, prompting protections to be passed by local governments. The law also prohibits sky burials for people who have passed on of diseases or other unknown causes, because they don't want the birds getting sick, and they don't want, like, the ground being tainted. There's also limits in place as to how many bodies can be eaten at a certain site. There's a belief that if a site has too many bodies, ghosts will start to appear.
Okay.
In some Buddhist beliefs, if the vultures do not touch or finish the body, it's considered like a bad omen.
Oh.
So that could mean that the person led like a dangerous and unhealthy or toxic lifestyle and therefore accumulated bad karma, which means that their reincarnation would therefore like be bad.
Interesting.
So the act is still performed today, much to like the dismay of the Chinese government, because they kind of wanted to just like stop doing it. Yeah. So cremation has started to become like a popular option. I don't know like what the details of that are though. Like I wonder if you have to travel a lot further then to like if somebody requested cremation, because like now you have to go where they're able to start fires and stuff.
Right.
So this is a much more...
It's local.
Yeah. So there are like quite a few sites out there that like...
Are still doing this.
That still do it, yeah. It's just like interesting because like, are those sites like regulated? Like, do you have to like... Like, and I'm honestly asking this, do you have to, like, book something there? Like, like, if it were a funeral home, do you have to say, like, hey, this is the place that I've picked, like, this is where I want everything to take place? Or, like, I wonder how that...
Yeah, I don't know. Like, honestly, I don't know too much about Tibet in general.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it is, like, something that's super interesting. But I don't know how, like centralized their government is, you know, or if it's more like locally governed. So is there less of a demand for regulation on stuff like that?
I mean, I know that they have local governments, but I think that they fall under like Chinese government.
Gotcha.
So that's why like, you know, China's like, hey, we don't really want you doing this anymore, but like we'll allow it in like very limited like circumstances.
Okay.
So like it's not like not anybody can just go and do this. Like you have to get a lot of approval before it's done, because I mean you're leaving a body out to the elements, you know, like and also there's the fact that like if it's not regulated, you can just go and murder somebody, throw their body up there, and just say,
but
hey,
like
it was
you
a
could
sky
do that.
burial.
You could do that anywhere.
I guess so, but like here where it's like these vultures specifically know to eat these bodies. You know what I mean? Like where you know that your chance of getting the body to disappear is
Are
like
pretty high.
Mm-hmm. And like if somebody stumbles upon this, you're just like, well,
it's a sky burial.
It's a sky burial, and I couldn't afford for the full like ceremony, so this is just what we're doing to our family member. No one's gonna question that.
That's true. Yeah.
You know, or if they come upon it, they're gonna be like, oh, I don't want to be disrespectful. I want to let them do what they got to do.
Right.
You know, so there's like a lot of flaws with it, but I don't know how regulated it is.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think they're only, like, modern-day flaws, you know? And I don't necessarily know that Tibet, like, abides by modern-day, like, necessities and stuff like that. So I'm of the belief that, like, if this is how these people want to say goodbye, then, like, that should be absolutely allowed. Same thing with, like, the Famadihana thing. Like, if that's how people want to go, then I think that...
Oh, for sure.
You know, that's... Who are we to say?
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, we're over here, like, we either bury you in the ground or light you on fire. So.
Right. I don't think our burial methods are ideal either, you know?
Yeah. So, you know, well, and the other thing is, too, is, like, the Chinese government wants us to stop because of the fact that there's not enough space to, like, put these people. Like, it's really just, like, cremation's ideal in the way that, like, now you're saving space.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So, there's, like, I didn't write it down in here, but it came up as I was doing, like, the research. Islam had, like, their own tradition, too, called, like, the Tower of Silence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with Zoroastrianism.
Yes.
Yeah, I was looking into that when I was going to do that.
Yeah.
It's a very similar
It's
thing.
very similar.
Yeah.
Where there's basically a tower, and there's, like, 3 rings. So, like, men are on the outside, women are in the middle, and then children are in, like, the innermost. Mm-hmm. And, like, the birds
They're just kind of left to...
Yeah. And then the bones fall into, like, this well in the middle, are ground up and put back to the earth.
Yeah.
And
honestly, like, I don't hate that as an idea.
No,
like,
I mean...
I would like to be repurposed back to the earth.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what it is. It's repurposing.
Yeah.
You do it with everything else. Why not with humans?
Or we should be doing it with everything else.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of what you should do with, like, traditional burials. Why are we putting you in a box in the ground?
Right.
We should just put you in the ground.
Right.
That way you can go back to the earth.
Yeah, I think it's so much more, like, even just, if you're not even talking from, like, an ecology standpoint, I think it's much more poetic. You know, like, if I'm just talking purely aesthetic, I'd still rather that.
Yeah. It's funny, because as a kid, I was like, I want to be, what did I say? I wanted to be buried, but then for a while I was like, no, I don't want to be buried because, like, I don't want the worms to eat me. But, like, it ain't gonna fucking matter,
It doesn't matter.
You're gonna be dead. Yeah. No one's gonna care. Eventually,
I want to be turned into one of those ecology pods so a tree can grow from my ashes.
My mom's urn is biodegradable.
Is it? That's pretty cool.
I can plant that thing if I want to.
You should.
I'm not going to. But I can.
You should plant her in Acadia. Then you can go visit her.
I can't afford to go up there. I would never see her again. So instead, she just sits in my room collecting dust. But yeah, hers is biodegradable. I want to be turned into a diamond. Real bad.
I also like that idea, yes.
That's what I want.
Pass that down.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what I want. Like, if I ever get engaged, I want somebody to steal my mom's ashes from my room, turn her into a diamond ring, and propose to me with that.
That's so fucked up.
How is that fucked up? I get to carry my mom with me always.
Just the part of them stealing her ashes.
Well, if they're going to ask me for it, that's going to be weirder.
I feel like that would be less weird. Like, I think that if they came to you and they were like, so I mean, obviously, if you're going to get ready to, like, get engaged, like, you've talked about it. It's not a surprise. You've talked about it.
I don't
You've
know.
At least
I've never been in this position.
You've had the conversation that, like, hey, look, I'm ready to settle down. So if they came to you and they were like, hey, look, I'm getting ready to propose. I'd really like to turn your mother's ashes into a ring. You're telling me that you'd balk at them?
No,
you'd be I don't want to know. I love that idea.
I don't want to know, though, that somebody's getting ready to propose to me.
You will.
I don't. I want you to know.
I will also know, but you'll have that conversation before I do.
I want you to have that conversation before I do. Because I don't have a father or anybody for them to go to, so if someone has to ask for my hand in marriage, they have to go to you.
Yes, I know that.
And then you can steal the ashes from my room, and it's fine.
Okay, sure, but I also hope that, like, at some point you've had the conversation with them, like, yeah, hey, maybe I'd like to marry you one day.
I mean, I don't know. I can't even have the conversation of, hey, do you want to be my boyfriend and buy me pizza? Because that doesn't even happen. So I like the idea of repurposing things like that. And there's so many things that you can do. You can be turned into like a reef.
Yeah.
Which I think is
cool,
cool, too.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Split me up. Turn me into a reef. Make me a diamond for somebody.
Yeah, you get to do your two favorite things. Be sparkly and also be the ocean.
Yes. Great idea.
Perfection.
Repopulate the fish down there.
I would like them to bury your diamond, though, near my tree.
Okay.
So we can be friends forever. Okay. And then some child one day will think that, like, a fairy lived there because they buried jewels.
Great. Perfect idea. I'm into it. All right, we're going to take a short break, and then we'll bring you more funeral things. All right, back to you.
All right, so I am going with the obvious here of the ancient Egyptians.
Hell yeah.
This one's pretty long, so just, like, sit back and chill and learn some shit.
I got my drink, and I'm ready.
Okay, so... Going all the way back to the pre-dynastic Egyptian days, there are no surviving writings from this era, but historians believe that this is like where the culture developed its focus on preservation and the physical body. In other parts of the world, people were cremating bodies as like a pretty standard practice at the time, but in Egypt, they were burying them. They started this practice by burying bodies in simple, shallow, oval pits and with just, like, a couple of things. Okay. Sometimes graves would contain multiple people or animals. They may have even believed that bodies would rise again if not treated with proper respect. Oh. As time went on, graves became, like, more complex. Bodies would be placed in wicker baskets and then in wood or terracotta coffins. Then, of course, came the sarcophagi, which we are all very, very familiar with. Yes. These graves also contained goods like jewelry, food, and games. Due to the burial goods, this shows that this period had some sense of an afterlife. Sorry, my words there were, like, illogical. I said, this showed this period. Okay. What does that mean?
Okay.
That's why we should proofread, Kayla. However, most people did not have a chance of getting into this afterlife. It was believed that the deceased needed to be able to serve a purpose in the afterlife and therefore giving higher-ranking individuals a role. Okay. Human sacrifice was not out of the question in ancient Egypt. Royal tombs from the earlier period show that people might have been sacrificed to serve their pharaoh in the afterlife. Later, this fell out of fashion, obviously, because you can't just go around killing your servants whenever you're going to die. Yeah. In favor of things like paintings and figurines to represent the help that they would need in the afterlife. When a pharaoh died, it was believed he would turn into some sort of god and could bestow the afterlife onto individuals he favored. So basically, it was like his to give out.
Okay.
Yeah. So this belief lasted quite a while, from the pre-dynastic days all the way up into the Old Kingdom. Okay. At this point, Egypt had not begun the mummification process. People were still being buried with some sort of preservation, though. They were usually arranged in a crouched or fetal position with the face towards the rising sun or the west, which was the direction they believed that held, like, the land of the dead. Okay. And they would use, like, essential oils, basically, to, like, preserve bodies at the time. Okay. Around 3600 BCE, Egyptians began to mummify their dead using oils like conifer resin and plant extracts. Now we are up to the early dynastic period, and people are beginning to garner a bit more wealth. Okay. They now begin to build the tombs over their burial sites rather than just like a simple grave. The walls of these tombs are often decorated in a style that kind of, like, mimics a palace facade. Okay. So, like, it's painted to look like it could be a fancy room, even though it's actually just brick. Oh. And suggesting that at this point, commoners, too, can achieve status after death. Okay. Which I love.
Yes.
Grave goods become more elaborate during this time period. They begin to include furniture, jewelry, weapons, cosmetics. Some of these tombs had items numbering in the thousands.
Tutankhamun, man.
Mm-hmm. Implying that they believed that they would be useful in the next life. Where you were buried during this era also became important. People who served the king were buried closer to his tomb. Okay. We also see the use of stela at this point, which is kind of like a monument depicting who was buried there. So this is kind of more like a common headstone that we would see today. It's basically just like a stone depicting who is buried inside that tomb.
Oh, okay.
Now we enter the Old Kingdom, which lasts until 2181 BCE. This is when we first see the pyramids begin to pop up. Mm-hmm. The king would be in his pyramid in the center, surrounded by his royal officials and smaller tombs. I think they were called mastaba, if I'm not mistaken. A lot of the officials were also family, making this like a really weird family cemetery.
Yes.
Among the elite, bodies were mummified, wrapped in linen bandages, and sometimes covered in plaster, and placed in stone sarcophagi or wooden coffins. Towards the end of the Old Kingdom, we see the use of mummy masks made from linen soaked in plaster, molded, and painted. Okay. So these are like the classic coverings that we see.
Yes.
We also start to see the use of canopic containers holding the internal organs. So this is when they started to like pull out the organs.
Yes.
To like mummify just the body, basically. Amulets made of gold, faience, and carnelian are used to protect different parts of the body. We also see the first evidence inside the coffins of the elite. Carvings of common grave goods become representations of the things that they are believed to like need in the afterlife. Okay. So there was less of a focus on like things that we used in this current life and what would you need coming up.
Okay.
A common feature during this era was the false door. And this is basically a carving of a door in the tomb, usually found in the chapel or on the outside. Okay. It was a place that served as like a place that you could make offerings and recite prayers to those who have already died. Statues begin to gain popularity at this time as well. Okay. In the Middle Kingdom, we see some reflections of the political trends in the tombs. Thebes. Oh man, it got cut off again. This is BS. Sorry, everybody. I am having some problems here. So basically, there was like more people being buried near Thebes, which is where the king or the pharaoh lived at the time. Yeah. And they were being carved like directly into the mountain versus like the pyramids that we used to. Like they were just like almost more like catacombs. Okay. At this time, this is in the 11th dynasty, and then in the 12th dynasty, we see people leaning more towards the pyramids that we're familiar with again. Okay. And that was down towards I think the city was called Lisht. Okay. For those of lower ranks, tombs were still fairly simple. Coffins were like wooden boxes, and the people were either mummified and wrapped in linen or just wrapped without the mummification, but they still got one of those cartonnage masks. Okay. Some tombs from this era include wooden shoes, or some tomb gifts include like wooden shoes and a simple statue that would be placed in there with them. One burial contained 12 loaves of bread, a leg of beef, and a jar of beer.
Those are all things I would need in the afterlife.
That's what I'm saying.
So again,
those are gifts I can get behind.
Bread? Fuck yeah.
Bread and beer.
Hell yes.
Give it to me.
Leave it for me.
Jewelry might be included, but most of the time it wasn't because it was just like too valuable to be buried with like people of lower status. Yeah. They couldn't afford it. There may be inscriptions and representations of the more important offerings, so they wouldn't necessarily like leave that stuff like furniture with them. They would just like carve it so that way it didn't have to be wasted. Okay. For men, this might include things like weapons or symbols of food, and women's coffins usually depicted mirrors, sandals, and food. Okay. In the late 12th dynasty, there was a big shift in these burials. Mm-hmm. The body previously positioned on its side would be placed now on its back. Okay. We see the disappearance of the inscriptions in favor of depictions of scarabs and figurines shaped like mummies. Mm-hmm. So this was more like the religious, like they were gearing more towards the religious aspect than just like the cultural aspect at this point. In the 13th dynasty, more changes were brought on. There's a difference between the burial styles of the north and south at this point, depicting the decentralization of the government. Okay. So, like, they can tell because the people were being buried in different ways that, like, the two regions were, like, not in agreement. Okay. Which is pretty interesting. Yeah. There is also an increase in the number of burials in a single tomb. So this is when, like, people started to... They couldn't afford to each have their own tomb, so the family would be, like, it was more like a burial plot.
Like a mausoleum of sorts?
Yeah.
Okay.
In the New Kingdom, we see the introduction of rock-cut tombs in the Valley of the Kings. So they're not, like, building pyramids so much at this point. They're more, it's like more towards the catacomb region. Okay. and no more pyramids. This is the last era in which people were buried with, like, a ton of stuff. Starting in the 19th dynasty, people were buried with things that could be made specifically for use in the next world.
Mm-hmm.
No tombs survive untouched from the 19th dynasty because they were buried with such, like, extravagant things.
Yeah.
Depictions of the funeral itself became popular to portray. So they would, like, again, gearing away from the religious aspect and more towards the how are we celebrating this aspect.
Okay.
Finally, in the late period, we see a return to the extravagant temple-like tombs. For the first time, they're being built for the non-royal elite class, so now it's, like, achievable for just, like, you know, really wealthy merchants and stuff versus just the pharaoh. But most of the tombs from this era were in shafts sunk into the ground, so, like, the tomb would go down and then the pyramid would be built over top of it.
Okay.
Which is probably a better idea for grave robber, like, for the sake of grave robbers.
I guess so. What's weird to me is that, like, where the fuck are all these pyramids?
I don't know. I don't know.
There's, like,
That's my
3 main
too.
Pyramids that we know, like, that are in that area?
Yeah.
I feel like it's, like, 3.
I feel like it's 3.
Where the fuck are the other ones?
I don't know. Were they just, like, not that impressive? Were they... I mean, I guess it's possible that they were buried. Like, there's a lot of sandstorms and stuff.
I guess so, but
But
like...
that would have to be a lot of sand.
Yeah.
I don't know. That was my question during this, too.
Yeah.
It's like, what happened to all of these great tombs?
Yeah. Interesting.
We see the continuation of statues and, like, grave goods meant specifically for the afterlife again in this era. So now to get into, like, more of the systematic what actually happened during these, like, rituals and stuff. Before embalming, mourners would cover their face with mud and have, like, a parade through town while beating their chests.
Okay.
So they're just out there singing songs for their dead loved ones. If the wife of a high-status male died, they had to wait a few days before embalming her, which I think we've discussed previously, to ensure that nobody abused her body.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. People who died violent deaths, like drowning or, like, assault or something like that, were viewed as, like, venerated, and only priests could touch their bodies.
Okay.
So they had held, like, a higher status.
Okay.
After the embalming, mourners may carry out, like, an act of judgment during the hour vigil. And people during this would basically volunteer to play Osiris and his brother Seth, or, I can't say this goddess's name, Nephthys, Horus, Anubis, and Thoth. Then came the funeral procession to the actual tomb. Cattle would, like, pull the body with friends and family kind of behind it. Once they got there, a priest would burn incense and pour milk onto the body.
Okay.
I'm not sure, like, what the milk signified, really. There wasn't
Maybe,
much
like, some
information
kind of,
on
like,
that.
purifying
Perhaps,
thing.
yes. At the tomb, the priest would perform the opening of the mouth, which is, like, a super important ceremony. Basically, the priest would literally just, like, open the deceased person's mouth. And the deceased person's head was turned toward the south, and the body was then imagined to be a statue-like replica of the dead versus the actual dead itself.
Okay.
Like, it turned into a representation of that person rather than that person.
Okay.
Opening the mouth symbolized allowing the person to speak and defend themselves during the judgment process.
Okay.
Then the priest, sometimes even the new king, would help to move the body into the mortuary temple, reciting prayers and spells, like, the whole time. The pyramid was then sealed off so that no one would ever be able to enter it again, but they did believe that the king's spirit was able to move through the temple at will.
Okay.
For both the elite and the poor, spells would be read from the Egyptian Book of the Dead in order to help guide the soul toward the Hall of Truth and Osiris. So what happened there was Osiris would weigh the heart of the deceased, and if it was found to be lighter than a feather, they were given passage to the Field of Reeds. The Field of Reeds was basically, like, their version of the afterlife, but it was pretty much just, like, a continuation of life.
Okay.
It wasn't necessarily different.
Okay.
If it was found not to be lighter than a feather, it was thrown to the ground and eaten by a Menti.
Okay.
Yep. And then the soul of that person ceased to exist.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. This was literally, like, the worst punishment imaginable.
That makes me nervous.
Yeah, it makes me nervous, too. Like, that's literally the worst thing that could have happened to an Egyptian. Later on, Egyptian burial rites would be shared with their pets, which I just love.
I love that.
In a home where a cat died, the family would shave their eyebrows and, like, observe a period of mourning. Not sure Why?
I was just gonna ask. Why?
Don't know. But I love it.
Okay.
Cats, dogs, baboons, gazelles, birds, and fish were all mummified and had like rituals done at their passing.
I mean, cool.
Yeah. Hey, man. I'm here to celebrate all lives.
We've seen a couple of like mummified animals
We have, yeah.
at the Penn Museum.
Yeah.
They got an alligator and a cat, I think.
I think that is correct. I remember the alligator.
I remember, because the alligator was the first thing that we came upon.
Yes, it's also like so this one recurring nightmare I've had since I was a kid contains a mummified alligator. So it sticks with me that we saw that because it's been haunting me since I was a child.
When we're done with this, we need to talk about that.
Okay, that's it. That's it for Egyptian.
Oh, I thought that was it for the mummified alligator. I was like,
oh no,
is
I've
it
got
just
more to say
there?
about that if you'd like.
I'm like, what do you mean that's it? It just appears and you just dream and that's it? Like, okay.
It's just haunted me since I was a kid, man. There was a mummy alligator in one of my dreams, and it's like one of those dreams that it just stuck with me.
Well, yeah. Okay. Interesting. All right, so I did Viking burials, which is actually super similar to Egyptian stuff, surprisingly enough. So, like, I feel like when we traditionally think of Viking burials, we're thinking of, like, you're laid out on a boat in, like, some straw and flowers. You are sent off, and then fucking burning arrows are shot at you. The boat lights on fire. That's a Viking burial.
Yes.
Truth behind that is that it never actually happened.
Never?
No.
Oh.
That's not a Viking burial.
Oh.
That's like a Hollywood-style Viking burial.
Ah. That damn Hollywood.
Yeah, so that is not what happens. So cremation was popular, believing that, like, the smoke from the burning of the body would carry the dead into the afterlife.
Okay.
I didn't know this, which I didn't really put in here, but Vikings were also, like, they were pagan? I didn't know that, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think pagan is really just, like, you worship more than one god.
I think there's more to it than that, obviously, but, like, a lot of their traditions are pagan, which is cool. So the ashes would then be buried. Boats were an important part of the culture, and therefore burial spots were often, like, outlined with stones, like, in the shape of a boat.
Okay.
So, like, that kind of signified. Yeah, it signified that, like, you were off on your next journey to the afterlife or whatever.
Okay.
So Vikings of high status would sometimes be buried within their boats, where they were adorned with new clothes. They would get a bunch of grave goods as well, such as swords, clothing, and jewelry. Some sites contained multiple bodies. Research determined that these bodies were most likely of slaves who had been sacrificed so that they could spend eternity with their master, similar to Egypt. So then, same thing, the idea behind grave goods was that the deceased would enter the afterlife. Well, for them, it was that the deceased would enter the afterlife in the same status that they were in, like, their living body.
Okay.
So any weapons that were buried with them would need to be broken beforehand. The soul was basically linked to your weapon, so, like, it needed a final end, just like you had.
Oh, I love that. That's so, like, cool.
For practicality purposes, too, they also did it because it discouraged grave robbing.
Yeah.
No one's going to want to steal a broken sword.
Right.
So then, actual burials tended to be more, like, mound-like in appearance because the ground in the northern lands was usually frozen and difficult to dig into. So a lot of, like, in, like, a lot of the graveyards that you'll see, there's just mounds everywhere. Because they can't really bury people. Funerals would last for, like, days at a time and usually ended on the 7th day with food and drink. This was especially important to families hoping for inheritance. Inheritances were divided into thirds. This is my favorite thing ever. So a third went to funeral clothes for the deceased.
Yes.
A third went to the funeral drink and ale. And then the last third went to the heir or heirs of the estate.
That's amazing.
Like, drinking was a huge deal with this. Like, that's how you, like, ended the
I mean, that's
the
just
funeral.
Vikings in general.
Well, yeah. That's how you, like, ended the funeral. You, like, it was called the funeral ale. So, like, you couldn't determine the inheritance or, like, who was getting what until that was, like, drunk. And then you good.
Nice. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, there wasn't much on it, but that's really what I have for you. I just thought it was interesting because I thought it was literally shooting arrows at a boat.
Yeah.
But, like, thinking about it in reality, that doesn't make any sense because, like, it takes temperatures up to, like, 2,000 degrees or something to, like, actually burn a body, and it would need to be for, like, 1 to 2 hours, like, continuously. And, like, you're not going to get that with, like, some straw on fire. You're just going to get the body to sink in the river, and then that's kind of it.
Yeah.
I didn't write any of this down, so I may mess up some of this information, but they did find, like, a ship.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was called the Osenberg or Ostenburg ship.
Okay.
And it's, like, the most well-preserved Viking burial that they've, like, ever found.
Oh, wow.
And it contained 2 women, one of them who was, like, a lot older, the other one who was younger. And they don't know if it was, like, mother-daughter, or who, like, they assume that the older one was, like, a queen of some sort.
Okay.
And had very, very high status because of, like, the clothing that she was buried in and the things that were in her grave. And the other one was still buried in, like, decent clothing. Not as great, but, like, still decent for the most part. So, like, that signifies she could have been a daughter. She could have been somebody, like, super close to her. It's not really clear what the dynamic was there. But it was just, like, really well preserved. So they use that as, like, their jumping point for, like, studying a lot of this stuff to see, like, how a lot of it went down. It's cool. There's not, like, a lot of pictures of it. They did, like, a lot of replicas of the boat, but not, like, there's like one of, like, the actual discovery of it, and that's kind of it. But they didn't send off these boats because they were fucking expensive to make.
Yeah,
these funerals were super expensive to have. So, like, they couldn't afford to be doing this every time somebody died, and people died all the time.
Well, yeah.
So, like, to have these boats ready is just, like, a lot. So, like, they could build a smaller one or, like, have, like, the stones laid in that shape and then just say, okay, you're good.
I kind of like that idea, though. Like, it's symbolic of the journey to the next life.
Yeah, it's cool. And as I said, like, the things that they were buried with were, like, things that represented them in life, but also, like, represented their status. But that also kind of makes me a little sad because, like, what would I have been buried with?
Aww.
A fucking iced latte and, like...
Yeah, but it's a very different world.
Ramen.
Like, we don't have to...
That represents my status in life.
We don't have to, like, fight for our survival now. So status is a lot different, you know? Like, it's not the same as it was then.
No,
Would
but
you
I'm
be
saying,
buried
like...
with a sword? No, because you've never had to fucking fight anybody in your life.
I'm just saying, in that time period, what would I have been buried with?
In that time period, you would have lived a very different life.
I probably wouldn't have lived at all. I wouldn't have survived. Are you kidding me? I barely survived this life. And it's not that bad.
Different tools.
There's very few tools there. Very few. I have a lot more here. So, that's Viking burials. Oh, and my sources were history.com, Wikipedia, and lifeinnorway.net.
Oh, I forgot to say mine too. I used Wikipedia, CNN.com, livescience.com, and ancient.eu.
Livescience.com?
Live science, live science, sure. Whatever.
Why are we stupid? Why do we have words that look exactly the same but sound different?
Dumb as hell.
It's dumb as hell.
Just as dumb as we are.
We're not that dumb.
All right. Do you have any book recommendations? I don't.
I actually do, because there's a book that I got some of this information out of. One that it sits on my bookshelf, and I feel like anybody who sees it is like, the fuck is that? It's called Death in the Afterlife, A Chronological Journey from Cremation to Quantum Resurrection by Clifford A. Pickover.
Okay.
It's a pretty thick book, but it literally has, like, so many different, whether it be funeral rites, like the Egyptian Book of the Dead is mentioned in there, like, just different things involving death.
Okay.
It's just a whole book about it.
Cool.
It doesn't have everything, obviously, and the author even states, like, if I put everything in here, this book would be fucking massive.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, like, he picked and chose his favorites, and then put that in there, but Sky burials were in there, which is how I first came upon them. And I think Viking burials might have been in there.
I'm sure they are.
Yeah, I'm sure
Everybody
they are too.
knows about Viking burials.
But there's like a lot of like cool stuff in there. So I started reading it from the beginning, and each little topic is only like a page and a half long, so it's easy to get through. Mm-hmm. It's like a good like coffee table book.
Yeah.
But also like people are gonna look at you weird because like, why do you have a book about cremation?
Come on, man. If they've met us, they won't ask that.
I mean, there's weirder books on my bookshelf, but that one just sticks out because it's, like, so bold.
Yeah.
And it's usually, like, not sitting on the shelf. It's, like, next to my bed, so it looks like I'm just constantly reading it. So it's like, what are you doing?
Just some light bedtime reading.
That's exactly what I'm like, oh, just some light reading before bed. And they're like,
you okay?
Do you need help?
Yes.
Is this a cry for help? What's going on here?
Yes, it is.
I love books about death. I have so many. I do. So yeah, cool. That's all we have on that stuff. And we will be back next week with another spooky topic. I don't even remember what next week's is.
I don't remember what it is off the top of my head either. But meet us back here and we'll all be surprised.
Like always.